Welcome. On the day that we are recording this, it is Friday, and I am in a really good mood. Why? I don't know, because things are hectic, but I am. So we're going with it. I am really excited for today's episode. I am really excited for our guest today. We have with us Amy Guerrero. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Amy before we get into it. So, when we stay curious together, we can experience unimaginable freedom. I love that quote. On a journey to heal from my trauma, I stumbled, pun intended, into a conscious, sober lifestyle and my deeper purpose to support people. Today, I support sober people to heal past traumas, to feel more freedom, pleasure, and purpose, and create healthy relationships and thrive. I was confident no single approach to healing and living a conscious, sober life would work for me. So why would it work for anyone else? I got busy educating myself, training and working with people in somatic experiencing, attachment theory, and other trauma-informed modalities, and relating it to living a conscious, sober lifestyle. What I discover is missing from my clients, who include all adults ready to create healthier relationships, is when we unravel the root causes of the addictive escape, such as grief, trauma, and painful events from the past. They discover the safety to live with purpose and thrive in all of their relationships. Outside of running my coaching business, Thrive in Recovery, you can find me practicing what I teach: cooking healthy, delicious food, practicing yoga, playing outdoors, and strengthening my connection to myself to serve others. I love that. So, hi, Amy. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so delightful to be here. And like all of our good moodness is jiving off of each other because I too am having a great Friday.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear that. Amy and I are moving buddies. So Amy has just moved. So we were talking about kind of like the process of moving before we started recording. So yeah, we're both vibing. Is there anything you want to add to that bio, or can I just get rolling? Can I just start with my 21 questions?
Just get started with your 21 questions. You said it all.
So can you define for the listeners what is somatic experiencing? Like, what does that mean? Because I love that technique, but I don't think a lot of people really know what that means.
Absolutely. So, I like to put things in very user-friendly words. So I'm not going to define it as maybe the Somatic Experiencing Institute would define it. I'm going to define it as Amy Guerrero defines it.
Of course.
It's really, for me as a conscious, sober woman, before I became conscious, I was really feeling my way through life. And so I was experiencing a lot of life through like all of the sensation in my body. And everyone in the world doesn't experience that or stops the sensation from happening and then just tries to analyze and think and think and think. And so what somatic experience is really a bottom up approach to mental health, mental wellness, and overall wellness. So it's really going into the body to allow the body to complete things that happened, whether unconscious or conscious. So for instance, with traumatic events or with grief, oftentimes we stuff it down and we put it away and we promise we're going to go back for it later, but then some kind of chronic inflammation shows up and it just won't go away. And often that's the body keeping the score, as Bessel would say, or telling us like, hey, there's something in here. And so often it's an emotional piece. So the somatics that I really practice and the somatic experiencing that I practice for myself and my clients is like, hey, let's listen to what your body wants to tell us. And then listen to what your mind is telling us about that. And really slowing it down. And so often people who've experienced any escapism with drugs or alcohol, or even just the behaviors that are just highly palatable on the GABA receptors and the feel-good transmitters, they don't remember that they have a body because it's been drowned out by the heavy use of other things outside of themselves. And, that's my story too.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question is, this is something that I feel like many people who struggle with addiction, and I also believe eating disorders, this is something that we do. We almost metaphorically, of course, are walking around with our heads detached from our bodies when we're like in our addiction. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And our heads get very manipulative and wise at the same sense because it's all a protective mechanism. So our brains start to create all of the story that becomes so intense and it just won't stop. When I was working in eating disorder clinics, I was just, always just like really watching the room instead of listening to every single word, because what I could see in their bodies would tell me the story in which they had calculated such a beautiful story in which most of it their body was telling me wasn't true. Right. But their head was like, oh no, this is exactly what's happening. And it's so true. And, it's a protective mechanism. I don't think there's anything wrong or right about it. It makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think that for some people, that's truly where they need to be, because it's one of those things where, maybe if we were fully in tune, we would lose it. It is, as you said, a protective measure. I believe it's a survival mechanism.
Absolutely.
It keeps us alive. So,
yep.
In a way, and this might sound like a twisted sentence, but sometimes our addiction is what keeps us alive.
Oh, if I didn't start using drugs and alcohol when I did, I think I would have been suicidal much sooner in my life than when I was. My first MDMA experience was a life changer. And I believe I used it in this like very beautiful way where I had journals and all of the things and just really got to the matter of like what was really bothering me. And I believe that those experiences, although then I, would use them in ways that weren't necessarily therapeutic for me. But if I didn't use the way I did, I don't think I'd be here now. Because at the end of my using, when that coping mechanism was taken away from me, I tried to kill myself for almost 18 months.
Yes, I am so appreciative of the fact that you shared that, because not only are you speaking some really hard and wise truth about addiction, but in saying what you just said, which is like drugs and alcohol essentially help to keep me alive, you are taking the shame off of it and the guilt and the stigma as well, because there's such a stigma, right? We know about stigma. We could talk about that all day, but when you look at it as like, I needed this to survive. There are so many people who carry so much guilt and shame from years when they had addiction and they struggled. But when you reframe it and you look at it as what it was, which was you just trying to survive, I feel like it takes a lot of that guilt and shame away.
100%. That was what I struggled with at first, because that I wasn't being met where I was at. And the people that were trying to support me, I'd started working on my trauma before I became physically dependent on alcohol. And so in the midst of about halfway through my journey, I met my birth mom. And then that's when my alcohol use just went up and up. So my coping mechanisms, I really leaned into them. But I was on this journey to heal all my trauma by the time I was 40. And I just giggle at myself now because like, that's so my personality. Like, I'm going to figure all of this shit out before I'm 40, because I'm going to walk into my 40, like totally freaking healed and like have it all figured out. And instead I'm like waking up shaking and like going, wait, you cannot take away my favorite coping mechanism. Like, what the actual fuck is going to happen now? And people were like trying to tell me that, that everything that I was saying was untrue and to not trust my body and that I was powerless and all of these things. And I was like, no, like, I hear you. And maybe this works for some people, but please listen to me and meet me where I'm at. And I wasn't really receiving that kind of support.
When you say people were telling you, do you mean like professionals, like healthcare professionals were telling you? Like, in what aspect were they telling you to not listen to your body?
So the first treatment center that I went to, beautiful humans that knew what they knew. That they were a 12-step modeled treatment center. So
Okay.
everything was modeled off of the 12 steps. And, they really believed in everything that the book said and didn't take into account the body and the trauma and the deeper underlying things. And so it was like, oh yeah, okay, sure. But right now you're powerless over alcohol and that's all we need to focus on. And I'm like, maybe, but like all day long, I can tell you what you want to hear, but my body's still telling me like, I'm not safe here. I'm not safe here. I'm not safe here. And that extra, and I think coping with food or by not really choosing food in the ways to nurture the body, right? Like that's something that's so similar where the people that are there just don't feel like they're being met where they're at and they're being told how they feel rather than actually being listened to on how they feel. And I feel like that was something that was really missing. So no fault of the practitioners, just not trained in the same things that I had already been studying for a long time because I was into like, my body's going to tell me what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. And absolutely. As I think back to like my like eating disorder treatment days, because I had a whole host of anorexia, bulimia, and then binge eating. And by the time I was in treatment, I was like in like full blown binge eating. And I was just, it's exactly like you said, they know what they know. And they don't know what they don't know. And what they didn't know was how badly I needed food to be able to survive with what I was going through. What they didn't know was how deeply and horribly traumatized I had just been. Mm. And I have a group of people, right, sitting here telling me like, you have to stop eating. You have to stop. And then, I would get those weekly like weigh-ins and they would be like, you gained more weight this week. You're not being compliant. And ultimately they kicked me out. I got kicked out and, cue guilt and shame. I mean, yeah. Please. But I mean, I understand. I feel like completely what you're saying because it's people are in a way telling you not to listen to your body.
Yeah. And, I don't know about your experience and I really won't like, this is such an important conversation because I felt shame from childhood and I was really good at feeling shame. As a matter of fact, I felt more comfortable in my shame than I did in my power. And so when people would tell me that to not listen to my body or, to basically that what I was doing was wrong again, it confirmed that I had to stay in the shame spiral. I call it a blanket, I stayed underneath the blanket of shame and walked through my life with not good enoughness, with compromising my body, with men, with work, with overworking, overdoing, over everything, over, really led by my masculine energy because I was more comfortable feeling ashamed of who I actually was than empowered to be the confident woman that I exhibited all the traits of it on the outside, but inside I was like, oh, just awfully like shameful of everything and always asking for permission to take up any freaking space in any room that I was in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like we have trauma that contributes to us feeling very disconnected from our bodies. And then we try to seek help. And then we inadvertently, we get this message, right? For people who aren't meaning to give us this message, but again, they don't know what they don't know. And we get this message that's like, well, yeah, you really don't know what's going on. So, this is really bad. So then we further detach from ourselves and we just sink into the shame. And I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to the point where I remember being a kid and if somebody ever told me, I would get the comment a lot because I think by nature, I'm a loud person. Like I do have a lot of like confident, like energy. And if somebody would tell me like, shh, just that, if you shush me, done, shame attack, right? You call it a shame blanket. I call it a shame attack. I'm done. Like hiding under a rock, shame spiral into suicidality.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. And it's just, I think it's something that we don't spend enough time naturalizing. It's just like, oh, it's totally a natural response based on the fact that we weren't being met or we were. And, no one was just looking in our eyes going, hey, that's okay. Like what you're feeling is totally natural. And instead it was like, oh my God, it's my fault again. And I can remember even, especially with my partners, how I would just shut down. And because I have such a big presence in a room as well, when I shut down like the whole room because of my energetic, I'm like a manifesting generator, utilitarian. I am an energy source. And
You're a manifesting generator?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a projector.
Oh, beautiful.
To the listeners out there, look this shit up. I am telling you, your life will be changed by human design. Go to jovianarchive.com, find your human design. You will be forever changed. That's a side note.
Yeah, totally. My best friend is a projector as well. And so I've learned so much about projectors. Yeah. Yeah. And our energy levels are so different. And so it's so beautiful to like have this information so that we can navigate our relationship in such a different way.
It's a truly beautiful thing. I think my husband is a manifesting generator. And it is like reading about manifesting generators. I'm like, wow, it's so cool. Anyway, I digress because I could talk about human design all day too. So I want to ask you, what was that turning point for you? Because you're describing the Amy who's kind of walking around feeling detached, getting this message from treatment facilities that you shouldn't trust your body, right? Then you're giving up, you're trying to give up this addiction that you actually need to survive. Like, how did you get from that Amy to the Amy who's like, oh, I needed this and it's okay that I needed this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It took about 18 months. So first it took me like just trying to take my life. I would try to drink enough and take enough Xanax to just not be here, and was so frustrated because it just wouldn't work. Like somehow, some way I would end up in the hospital, and somehow I would wake up. And I started writing this program, the Thrive and Recovery, like methodologies, I call it Regroovin, in 2014 when I was first in treatment. And by 2016, I was unsuccessful again. And I was just like, enough is enough. And I went to a treatment center and I said, please, like, let me do it my way. Hold space for me. Like, I have a plan. I just need a safe environment to like get out of this. And I will be like, the client that I need to be if you give me space to study and do my own thing during groups. And they did. I did exactly what I was told to do and got out of there. And then I chose to move into sober living. And when I moved into sober living, I immediately started creating the coursework and teaching it 3 months later, and then started my business. So it's like, I knew that if I wasn't going to die, that I needed to live like I was never going to live before. And that, exactly like you said, like I needed to go through this experience to be here now, to bring this into the world. So it wasn't really like this super empowered decision. It was just like, oh, okay, I didn't die again. So I'm going to live like I've never lived before.
But that's realistic, right? Like, I so appreciate that, because that's what it's like. That's recovery. It's not like, I think, the way they make it fucking look in movies where you wake up one day and the sun shines fucking brighter and the birds are chirping and, the birds are singing that you're meant to be alive. Like, that's not the shit that happens. It's like we wake up and we're like, well, I know for me, it was like, I had an attempt and then it didn't work. And I was like, it's very similar. I was like, well, fuck. Like, I'm here. Like, I guess I'm fucking here. So what am I going to do about this shit?
Yeah. 100%. It wasn't this beautiful,
right.
It was like, I'm fucking here and I'm going to fucking make this decision. And everyone and then I think there was a bit of like, I'm going to prove the haters fucking wrong.
Yes. That anger that you make productive instead of self-destructive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was still really involved in the 12-step communities and, the things that like I knew that people told me they worked. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to study them. I'm going to go into like why these things are developed and why it works, and then study smart recovery, and then study life ring, and then study all of these different modalities and figure out something. What's the through line for all of them? Like, why does this work? And so I was fucking angry at first. And so I wanted to prove everybody fucking wrong. And then I also wanted the answer to be through the body. And so what I first started with my gateway in was actually through nutrition and wellness, and just understanding, like, instead of eliminating things from people's diet, because we already eliminated so much, how can we add in things to support them? And so I started making essential oil blends, and I started teaching yoga classes, and just, really encouraging everyone because I was working at treatment centers, encouraging them to go to sound baths and to go into the somatics. Just like, let's just get to know that you have a body that's meant to do more than take you out in so many different ways, because that detachment, that head that's not attached to the body, just felt like their body was kind of like in their way, and then therefore abused it. And all of the sex that happened in there, I was just like, ouch, that doesn't feel good for you. Like for many of the women, they weren't even having orgasms, but they were sleeping with everyone at treatment. And I was just like, let's stop that. And let's add in some yummy oils and some yummy practices. And let's go to the beach every day. And then let's acquaint yourself with your sensuality in a different way.
Yes, I love that. Like, operating from the approach of, what can we add? Right? What can we add? Because it's not, you clearly are lacking, right? We're already like lacking in something if we are caught up in addiction and eating disorders. So it's like, let's not take anything away right now, because that's not safe. And then in my private practice, I tend to be very like slow with that. And I actually get a lot of, in working with kids, because I work with kids and adults, but the parents of kids are often on my ass about like, why is my kid still binge eating? Why? This isn't working. And I'm very slow. Like, I'm never like, well, why don't you just stop? Because you don't know what's on the other side of that. And 9 times out of 10, it's deep, intense suicidality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh gosh. And there's just, I don't know how many times you were told that, oh God, Amy, you're so smart. Why don't you just stop?
You have such a bright future. Just stop.
Oh my God. I just remember at one point I remember I did try to kick someone in the face when they told me that, because I was just like, it's so insulting. I was drunk, but it's so insulting to hear that. Like, I know I'm fucking smart. I know I've accomplished all of this shit. I know that it's not a wise decision. My prefrontal cortex is not online right now. Get the fuck out of my face. And if you ever tell me to just stop again, really listen to what that means.
Right. So your only problem won't be my foot. If you ever fucking tell me to stop again, we're going to have much bigger problems than my foot in your face.
Yeah. And I get it, because the parents want to control that so badly. And then that's their unhealed emotional trauma.
Totally. 1,000%. So for you, this is the approach that you're taking, and you work individually with people?
And in groups. Yeah.
In groups. So so tell me a little bit about the business that you have, because you've taken what I feel is like a newer approach, and a highly effective approach to recovering from addiction and trauma. Because, right, the biggest thing is, okay, now what, right? After I'm no longer an alcoholic, or I no longer, I'm using drugs. Now what do I do? I feel like you have found a really beautiful way of helping people through that. So how do you do that? If you can answer that in a few sentences. I don't know if you can.
I can, actually. I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was like, you're sober, now what?
Yeah.
Right? Now, maybe for the first time, we're learning how to do life. Right. And the first thing that I do when I'm working with people one-on-one is we usually start with something like a 3-month commitment to one another, and really just decide yes, we're in it. And that first month is all about teaching regulation. and really helping them understand that they have a nervous system and the three parts of the nervous system, and really teaching polyvagal and then understanding their attachment patterns, and then not, going too deep into the trauma, but just touching on the things that we know, what I call them, their anchors of trauma, right? Like, oh, that's the incident that started this, and that's the incident that started this. And so we build that connection to take away the shame and the guilt and the blame, right? Because I believe that once we understand that we have a nervous system and we really get to know it and map it out, then we're like, oh, yes, it all makes sense. It wasn't my fault. And then we can start like actually doing a life and setting up a plan to repair, to reconnect, and to build that trust from within so that people can start to trust from without as well. And, just depending on high level mentorship. So we are talking every day, and like, there's just a lot that happens in that one-on-one work that, most of my clients now are starting their own businesses. And so it's so beautiful to watch this ripple out. And then, they have 10 or 15 clients that are learning this work. And then those 10 or 15 clients, a couple of them start. And I'm like, yes, this is how we're going to change the world, right? Is that the more people that understand this. So
yes,
it starts with that deep one-on-one, depending on where they are in their journey. Sometimes people are coming to me with 10 or 15 years of sobriety, but not that real deeper, as you said earlier, that fucking recovery, right? Like they're still just scratching the surface, and they've been sober for 10 or 15 years, and they're ready to do their deeper work. And they've heard something in me that they're just like, oh yeah, girl, please help me get there. And that's really fun because things happen so quickly because we have a lot of sober time, but we don't have a lot of time that they went into their trauma. And they're often very resistant and very blocked by their 12-stepness. And y'all, I do not have anything against 12-step at all, but there's some deconditioning that has to happen from any place that we spend a lot of time.
Oh yeah.
Like there's nothing right or wrong with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So then if I understand this correctly, you don't work with people who are active in their addiction?
Depending. Yeah. So I have several people right now that I'm working with that are still, having a little bit of going back to that coping mechanism every now and again.
Right.
But safety is everything for me. So if someone's really in their stuff and I know that I'm not going to be able to keep them safe because I'm not with them physically, then I will, suggest that they go someplace else, just because safety is so important. And again, if they're not going to get well if they don't feel safe with me.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was going to say, I think that we should clarify that there's a certain level here, right, where it's simply not safe. So I don't want for the listeners for it to come off as like, I'm kind of being like, oh yeah, just let people run hog wild into the arms of addiction and we just watch people waste. No, right? Like that's not what we're doing here.
No.
There's certainly a level of assessment there where, we're like, is this safe? Is it not safe? I've had people who come to me with an eating disorder and I'm like, this isn't safe. Like, I'm not trying to tell you have to give up the thing that's kind of keeping you alive, but now the thing that's keeping you alive is nearly killing you. And that's where it's like, I feel like unsafe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, fortunately, I'm usually able to tell that within the first conversation. And then I'm able to make lots of recommendations in places that I really trust and that I've, built relationships with, that I know that they have some of these modalities in place to keep them safe. And then we can work together after that initial, maybe just, a little time out away from their coping mechanism and just understanding it at a higher level.
Totally. Yeah, totally. So you also have Thrive in Recovery is your program, but you also recently have Bridge to Trust.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's really neat.
Oh, it's so neat. Yeah. So what I found was that people were working with me for 3 months and then 6 months sometimes, and then they just didn't know how to connect to their friends and family. they had this understanding of their nervous system. They had this understanding of their attachment system. And they were just like, no one understands me. And they just like keep taking me back to my old patterns and my old behaviors. So the bridge to trust experience is all about learning to trust what you know, to come back to that intuition, to come back to that trust, and then to invite your friends and family from that place to learn with you, right? Not about the addiction, not about the recovery, but like, hey, how can we connect more deeply as humans here and have, yummier, healthier communication with each other and really bridge this trust so that we can recover the trust that maybe was broken when we were heavily into our patterns. Because I know for me, I broke a lot of trust out there in the world. And it took time for me to build that bridge within myself. So then I felt safe to offer it to others. Like, oh, you can come closer to me. Like, and here's how I can show you without guilt and shame and an amends process of me going, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It was more like, hey, I get it. What can I do to make this right? And how can we move on from here?
That is a beautiful thing. And I think probably hugely helpful, because one of the things that I have seen lead to relapse is a lack of those protective factors, i.e., relationships. So you're not just saying, okay, great, you've worked through your trauma. We've been working together. Good luck. Have fun. Catch on the other side. What you're doing is taking it a step further and then going, hey, let's also now build some really healthy and trusting relationships in your life so that you can continue on this path. Oh, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah. And it's so, because isolation and the loneliness, it's like we can learn all of this shit, but if we're not practicing it with someone that we trust,
we fall right back into,
very quickly.
Yeah.
And so it's so cool because, the Bridge to Trust events have led to a community, and just watching this community just grow with each other and like feel that like, oh my gosh, and practicing with each other and then going and practicing with their friends and their family and then going, oh wait, this works. And then inviting their friends and family to come join the community. And then all of a sudden we've got parents and their children and partners and their partner, and their partners are like, oh shit, like I need this stuff.
Yeah.
I always thought it was them. I always thought it was their fault, and I'm pointing my finger. There's a lot of that. And the finger pointing starts to go like, oh shit, we're in this together. We both have nervous systems. Like, like how can we really understand this at a deeper level?
Yes, because it becomes so easy to blame the person with the addiction or the person with the like quote unquote mental health, right? It's them. They're sick. They're not well, and I'm just like, man, I wish I could bring my whole family to one of these Bridge to Trust, right? Because I'm the outcast in my family, even like doing what I do. It's like, oh, she's the weird one. We don't talk to her. So it's like, right. I'm sure in this event, right, you have family members that then their eyes are open to, oh, right, multiple nervous systems. We're all trying to regulate. I did play a part in this. I did have a role to play in this as well. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And another Bridge to Trust event is coming up at the end of July. And it's so exciting because exactly what you said happens. I have many parents that come without their children at first, and then they're like, oh shit. Like, thank you. Because I don't make it about the coping mechanisms. It's all about like the solution.
Yeah.
And the root cause of like what keeps us stuck intergenerationally and that trauma. And then, just I like to bring fun. I call everything I do a regrooving method. So we're regrooving our nervous systems and I bring a lot of fun and breath, sound, and movement into things. And so it's like, oh, we're not just going to sit still and learn a bunch of shit. We're going to like interact and have some fun together and not take this so seriously that they're like, oh, she's the weird one. Like, yes. We're all weird together, y'all.
We're all weird. We're all a little dysregulated.
Absolutely. And when you learn to come back to regulation and giggle about it, then we can really embrace that dysregulation and it becomes regulated.
Yes. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it's freedom.
It is. It truly is. So now, if people would like to find you, because you're speaking some really innovative treatment approaches, what you're doing is so important, so important. How can people find you?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is Instagram, Facebook, and my website is Thrive in Recovery with Amy. So there's no secret there. It's how do you thrive in recovery and with Amy, right? So it's all there. Instagram is a great place to get to know me. There's tons of videos. I go live 3 times a week. So I'm there for Q&As. Facebook is the same as, I do a weekend wellness hack every Sunday night on Facebook, and I have been for years. So I'm really consistent in my practices, and I invite you to come closer to check it out. And then we go from there.
So cool. So for the listeners out there, I'm going to be following you myself. Because I really think I love what you're doing. I really, really do. And B, for the listeners out there, I will link everything in the show notes. So the deal, you know by now, head over to the show notes and you will find everything that you need, all things Amy. Amy, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been truly a delightful conversation. You're a delightful human being, and you are really kicking ass in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. It's so great to be here with you today, and I will talk to you soon. Good luck on the rest of your move too.
Thanks for listening, everyone. For more information, please head over to lightaftertrauma.com, or you can also follow us on social media. On Instagram, we are at lightaftertrauma, and on Twitter, it is at lightafterpod. Lastly, please head over to patreon.com/lightaftertrauma to support our show. We are asking for $5 a month, which is the equivalent to a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So please head on over again. That's patreon.com/lightaftertrauma. Thank you, and we appreciate your support.